Welcome to the Unstoppable Freedom Podcast. I'm Jimmy Page. This is going to be part 2 of a 2-part series with Taylor Rhodes. He's the executive director of the Rocky Mountain Gun Owners in Colorado. You don't want to miss this episode because we're going to talk about some hot button issues as it pertains to defending yourself, your family, and your property. Here we go. But let's shift gears just a little bit. I want to ask you, one of the things I found interesting about Rocky Mountain Gun Owners is that you talk about having accepting no compromise, right? And there's a lot of fair-minded, reasonable people who have heard the propaganda, who have heard the narrative, and they're willing to accept restriction after restriction after restriction. A lot of well-meaning people, such as gun registrations or universal background checks, or even these scary weapon bans, or 3-day waiting periods. Let's talk about this slippery slope. Let's talk about why you're kind of a no-nonsense, no-compromise type of lobbying force.
So we know from history that when one policy is enacted, if they take an inch, they will take a mile. During this last court proceeding, the most of the conversation really wasn't around waiting periods. It was around background checks. Well, why is that? Well, in 2013, Colorado enacted universal background checks. If they would not have done that, there would be no possible way for them to impose a 3-day waiting period. So, what's next? In 2019, as I said, they enacted red flag gun confiscation.
Yeah.
We knew they wanted more. It wasn't their model legislation. We knew that they were going to take another bite at the apple. So for so many years, the NRA specifically has sold us a bill of goods, saying that we need to cut this deal to make sure that we please everybody and that we advance freedom and preserve the Second Amendment. That is total BS. They have sold us down the river, and we have nothing to show for it. Yeah. So Rocky Mountain Gun Owners and our affiliate organizations, our parent organization is the National Association for Gun Rights, have deemed that we're not going to cut deals in smoke-filled rooms with politicians that want to steal your freedom. That is not something that we want to do. I mean, look, we have the NRA rep in 2018 endorsed a Democrat that was blatantly anti-gun against Stephanie Luck, who is possibly the best Republican we have in the state house today. Wow. And we won't stand for that. I don't care what party you have by your name. I was actually joking with a couple of representatives earlier today. There was a gentleman from Thornton, Colorado. His name's Sed Charbini. And he voted right on every single gun reform issue other than one. And I honestly think that he did not vote right on the last one because he did not want to receive an endorsement from us. Right. But if he would have voted right on all of those bills, I would have probably cut him a check. And I would have endorsed him. Yeah. Because it takes guts, especially in a supermajority like that, to stand up to your caucus and vote the right way. Yeah. And can't thank people like that enough. But when you go out and endorse people that are literally voting for gun control, and in a tight conservative seat, should be held by a Republican, has been for the last 6 years, that's just unacceptable. Yeah. We're not going to give out A ratings like after dinner mints. For example, last 2 years ago in 2020, or in 2022, I guess it was the election, Hugh McKean was the minority leader of the Republican Party. He had not only voted for gun control, but he had sponsored gun control through a backdoor alley that would have required the permitting system to be regulated at the state, which essentially gave the state a list of every gun owner there is in Colorado. Now, the NRA comes in and gives him their highest rating of A+, and we're fighting against him because we want this sapsucker gone and replace him with somebody that's 100% pro-gun. But that is the fight that we're up against, and unfortunately, it is not just we are fighting the Democrats. A lot of the time, we're fighting within who should be our friends.
Yeah. Yeah, and it has become a political football, right? I mean, on both sides of the aisle, this is a political football. I think many reasonable people who don't have a history with guns are open to these restrictions.
Sure.
And I get that. I understand where they're coming from, but I think that's why your perspective on the end game, because the end game is not gun control, it's the end of guns. That really is the end game. This is not just to control them. This is not just to, put more restrictions on it. In the end, I mean, we hear our politicians telling us exactly what they're going to do. For example, They will not stop until guns are confiscated, and law-abiding citizens are criminalized for wanting the ability to protect and defend their own personal safety, their families, even their property, right? They're not going to stop. In fact, I want you to sound off on this. Obviously, we just had another crisis. We had another mass shooting up in Maine, and no politician will ever let a crisis go to waste. So they're going to use it. And I saw President Biden just renewed again the push to ban assault weapons. And worse than that, VP Harris came out following the shooting, which, by the way, was a mentally ill vet who needed help. Everyone knew it was actually reported to the police that he was at a significant risk to the community. The entire police force knew it. But she suggested that we use Australia as the model to confiscate guns. Why is this always their solution?
Well, of course, they don't want to address the real problem. They love the welfare state. They're getting tons of votes from those people. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the whole conversation around this is of the tool that is being used.
Yeah.
Is the whole conversation, when in reality this is a much more complex issue,
Yeah.
and they don't want to tackle it on the complex side.
Yeah.
They want to please the anti-gun lobby, who is literally dumping millions of dollars into their campaign coffers. Here in Colorado, the anti-guns, pro or anti-gun champion is Tom Sullivan. 2 weeks before the election, we had endorsed the gentleman running against him, a guy named Tom Kim. Upon our endorsement, they dropped like $1.7 million into that race on TV ads.
Gosh.
This is a state Senate race.
Unreal.
That is money that would be spent traditionally in U.S. Congress races and U.S. Senate races. So they have a basically unlimited checkbook that they can do these types of things. Yeah. So we're stuck with fighting them in the courts, where we've had a bunch of success. Yeah. So we plan on continuing to do that. Here in Colorado, it was actually, should have mentioned on this earlier, the first post-Bruin case in America was filed by Rocky Mountain gun owners against the town of Boulder, Superior, Louisville, and Boulder County. And they enacted an assault weapons ban that was a little less stringent than the states, but it was still a complete weapons ban. You had to turn it in or register it. It's ridiculous. Within days of that, an Obama-appointed judge ruled in our favor for a temporary restraining order, and then again granted a court order that stayed the law until the case was over. So what we're doing is not just because we want to sue because we want to sue.
Right.
Now, if the Bruin decision wouldn't have happened, would we be taking these same measures? Probably not. We wouldn't have a remedy. We could sue under Heller and McDonald, but those didn't do near the damage to the gun grabbers' agenda as the Bruin decision did. So we believe that the Supreme Court gave gun rights advocates a 4-ton wrecking ball to go out and dismantle every single gun law that is on the books, and dare them to pass it in the legislatures around the country, because we're winning on this issue by and large. We're winning on the gun issue, and we don't expect to lose anytime soon.
It's amazing. Are you carrying this approach? Because this is an offensive approach. I love it, because I fundamentally believe that good people who believe in America and believe in the Constitution need to go on offense. We cannot continue to just enjoy the blessings of liberty. We now have to defend them, and we have to defend them actively. Are you taking this legislative approach, this the legal approach, to other states? Are other people modeling what you're doing? Are we expanding that influence?
Yeah, absolutely. So in coordination with the National Association for Gun Rights, you can find them at gunrights.org. We have filed, I believe it is 6 separate lawsuits specifically on assault weapons and magazine bans around the country.
That's great.
We have filed in Hawaii. There's 2 lawsuits in Illinois. Illinois is split as a split circuit state. We filed in where we filed against Mitt Romney's assault weapons ban. There's a couple others that I'm not thinking of right now. But the end goal is to have weapons bans specifically be taken up by the Supreme Court, because we think that we have the votes there to make sure that, no politician can ever say again, I'm going to take your AR-15.
That's great. I love it. And this is a legal solution, but I appreciate the fact that you're doing it, that you're raising money to do it, and that you're coordinating with other states, because we've got listeners from every state in the country, and they're all dealing with the same issues, and they want to know that they've got some recourse here. Let's shift gears just a little bit. I want your thoughts on a couple of topics, on 3 in specific that I know impact this issue. Tell us your thoughts on gun-free zones, especially as it relates to schools and businesses.
Right. So we heard earlier that I was talking about that the vast majority of these violent acts of crime are happening in these so-called gun-free zones. Gun-free zones, specifically the Gun-Free Zone School, or the Gun-Free School Zone Act. I think it was 98. Has left our youth and left many of our businesses as sitting ducks. When these deranged people are looking at targets, they are not looking at places that they know will be armed. They are looking at places that there are soft targets, specifically schools that they know they're not going to be met with resistance. Now, we've seen groups all over the country that have pushed to end these so-called gun-free zones. But even in many Republican circles, gun-free zones are still a popular argument to be had. So really, as liberty activists, we have to change the way that we're talking to politicians about this, not asking them to do it politely, but respectfully but sternly forcing them to vote the way that we want, and to carry these bills and to push them through the legislature. I mean, we've seen this in states all over the country where we have lobbied for constitutional carry. In the state of Texas, NAGR was the leading force for passing constitutional carry. In a state like Texas, it was so difficult to pass constitutional carry. Literally, the Speaker of the House was sending state police to arrest liberty activists that were knocking doors in districts that were swing districts for politicians, telling their constituents that, hey, John Doe is not going to vote for constitutional carry. Call him and force him to change his mind. Speaker of the House sends out people to bully these kids in many aspects into not going out and knocking doors because they're fearing prosecution from the state. So it's not as easy as we think in a lot of these situations. And really asking and knowing who your representatives are, not just in Congress and in the White House. Largely, those people don't do much at all. Really, where we're fighting is in state legislatures across the country. It is critical that you know your state representative and your state senator, your town councilman, your county commissioners. Know those people, because those people are the ones that are really forcing a lot of these bad laws down our throats. It's not just the people in Washington, D.C.
It's amazing. A lot of most of politics is local, and most of the real impact happens locally. Every now and then we get a decision at the national level that makes it easier, like we've talked about, to go after these bad laws. But really, it's mostly won locally. Let's talk a little bit about, let's give parents some tips on how to keep their kids safe in school. We've talked about this issue a lot. We've sent $100 billion. I mean, heck, it's probably much more than that now overseas to defend other communities. And here we are. We can't even protect or harden, as we say, harden the targets of our schools. I'm under the belief that we could protect our kids at school if we decided to.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. There's a ton of programs, one of which Able Shepherd that I participate in, that teach responsible gun ownership. They show how to use a firearm. But I think step one is allowing teachers to carry,
Yeah.
ending those gun-free school zones around the country, and specifically in our state, giving them the opportunity, not forcing them.
That's right.
I would never want to force any policy on anyone,
Yep.
but giving those people the opportunity to carry if they so wish.
Yeah.
Second is allowing parents and teachers and approved staff. I mean, I know that there was a school district, I think it was in Southern Colorado, two years ago, that they had little dads that were coming to the school, standing out in front of the school with their AR, saying, "Come on, I dare you to come attack this school." And I believe that may actually still be happening now. I need to check on that.
Wow.
So, hardening the schools is definitely a must. I believe that starts with allowing teachers to carry again.
Yeah, I agree. And, it's interesting because we have encouraged parents to go to school board meetings and on the public record when the public is given the opportunity to talk for 90 seconds or maybe up to 3 minutes, kind of an embarrassing situation, but to bring this issue up and to ask those board members what they are doing. Now, they're not going to reveal their security plans, of course, but what they're doing to ensure that kids are safe at school. This is a foreseeable issue now. From a legal perspective, we've had enough issues in school where this is a foreseeable event. And if administrators, teachers, board members don't engage in this, they are being negligent and they should be held responsible. So we need to continue to keep that in front of our board members so that they know we're going to hold them accountable if something happens in our school and they didn't take the necessary steps to protect our kids.
Right, exactly. And the unfortunate situation is a lot of these schools don't have SROs even at the base level.
Yep.
I know Douglas County and the county that I live in, I think that's in some of the elementary schools, they have one per 3 or 4 schools, and that guy just floats around to those places. And we're spending, countless dollars on administrators and things of that nature, but we're not taking care of our kids.
Yeah.
I mean, we got to start taking care of one another.
Yeah.
And I think it does start in our schools.
It does. Hey, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about business in particular as it relates to this. A growing number of businesses are posting no gun signs, and private businesses have the right to restrict guns on their property. I'm thinking in terms of some of the big boxes like Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, et cetera. You have a merchant awareness program. Tell us about that and what action citizens can take to communicate with businesses that do post these no gun zone policies.
So first off, I'm not an attorney. I don't play one on TV, but ignore them. Ignore those signs. I would rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6. I never listen to those stupid things unless there's a metal detector at the door. 95% of the time, I've got a gun on me. However, RMGO does a program that you can ask for the store manager. We give out these little cards and it says that, hey, I'm letting you know that I am contacting Rocky Mountain gun owners, and they're going to put on their website and send out to all of their members for them not to shop at your store because you cannot protect yourself in that said store. So that's something that we've been doing since our founding in the 90s. It gets a lot of our attention. We get a bunch of those calls weekly. We probably get, probably 5 a week or so of a new shop that's popped up that, throws a stupid no guns allowed sign. When you walk into our complex upstairs, there's actually an opposite sign that says all staff is armed and will treat threats as necessary threats.
That's great.
So
I think this is important. We've seen over the last year or so the power of economics, right? We've seen stores that are assaulting our basic values and our sense of, we think about Target, which had the transgender line and was not only did they have a transgender line of clothing, but they also were supporting transgender procedures. They were funding things all around the country. They were lobbying. I mean, it was a disaster. And people said, hey, you know what? We're not going to shop at Target anymore. And it hurt them to the tune of billions of dollars. We've seen Bud Light. We've seen the fact that principled people can take action and create change. We look at Bud Light, for example, which came out with the Dylan Mulvaney cans. a disaster. They lost $27 billion. They've lost a huge percentage of their market share. Unfortunately, good people who deliver beer, who work for that company, are being hurt. But now we've seen that they just entered into an advertising arrangement with the UFC, arguably the most masculine sport in the history of Earth outside of Rome, So we've seen that it can have impact. I'm imagining that this idea of communicating with local businesses in particular can have a positive effect.
Yeah, it certainly does. So my degree from Liberty, as we discussed earlier, is actually in marketing and public relations, and we actually talk a lot about this in my coursework, how public opinion can kill a business. And we've seen that through Bud Light. We've seen that through Target. Starbucks, I don't think those people that drink Starbucks are addicted to Starbucks. Yeah. They don't care if 5% of their money is going to Planned Parenthood. It's just take my money and don't tell me about it.
Yeah.
Starbucks hasn't seen that yet. I think they probably should.
Yeah.
Because they're giving money to Planned Parenthood still.
I agree.
They were giving money to Hillary Clinton directly as well. They were taking, it was like 1.5% of every sale was going to the Clinton campaign.
Wow.
In 16.
Wow.
So, some of those things that know where your money's going when you're shopping at stores. And I always say shop local. I mean, we've gotten a bunch of calls recently. So in our lawsuit against the city and county of Boulder and the town surrounding, the Cabela's here in Colorado will not sell to those people that live in those cities, even though there's a federal court order on it. And I'm like, who cares? Take your business elsewhere. If they don't want to sell you a gun that you are legally allowed to own, who cares?
Yeah.
Take your business elsewhere and, don't let the door hit them when they leave. It's ridiculous that we're talking about, freedoms here and just things that are as simple as where you shop. I mean, it is that simple just to take into consideration. Now, when Target was on the chopping block, I think my wife still has PTSD from those conversations that we're not going to shop there anymore. But those are conversations that need to be had in households.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I have not shopped at Target since that disaster, and I won't. I mean, it's a matter of principle. And, everyone always asks me, well, where do you draw the line? Because aren't all these companies, especially the big ones, aren't they all supporting causes that are an offense to our values? And probably so to some extent. But my thing is, it's always a matter of conscience. When I become aware of something that someone's doing, then I'm going to assess the damage that's being done. And then I'm going to make decisions based upon that. So I think that's part of our civic duty, is to be informed citizens, right? And to take action based upon our values.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
100% agree.
Yep. So, you obviously are advocating for what I would consider true firearms freedom, right? This idea of a constitutional carry, of course, is supported by every single thing that our founding fathers wrote. Every single thing supports it. These restrictions based on, oh no, that's a trained army or militia, and they've taken it completely out of context. When you go back, David Barton has a great resource called the Second Amendment. And he, in there, details all of the things that our founding fathers and many others over the next 150, 200 years, what they actually wrote. It is stunning what they believed. They actually had laws in the early days up through the mid 1800s that required men to carry firearms and adequate ammo to protect themselves, their family, and their property.
That's something that we talked about in our case against the 18 to 21 ban. And you're exactly right. It wasn't just allowed. No. In many cases, most cases we see was at the age of 15.
Yes.
That people were required. There were like 6 or 7 cases in smaller towns in Massachusetts that age was actually as low as 13.
It's amazing.
It's ridiculous to even conjure that this should not be allowed based on the text, history, and tradition of the Second Amendment.
Yeah, I mean, George Washington said a free people ought to be armed. I mean, this is George Washington. Thomas Jefferson, who takes so much heat, Thomas Jefferson, unfortunately, is used against religious people probably more than any because of his out of context comment about the separation of church and state, which of course meant that the government could not impose or restrict your religious expression, couldn't establish a national religion. But he even said that he believes that a good American citizen is armed And to disarm them is actually part of what they were fighting against, because at the time of the revolution, the British were enforcing a ban on weapons because they knew that was the only way to enslave us as a colony.
Right.
Just
Right. Yeah. I heard a sermon not long ago. Well, I guess it was probably 2.5 years ago now. That was preached, and the title of the sermon, it was so great. It was called "The Church is Called to Be Faithful, Not Tax Exempt." And I think
Wow.
so many churches are so worried about losing their tax exempt status,
Yes.
that they will not touch on political issues,
Yes.
which the Bible directly tells us we need to talk about the issues of our day,
Yes.
and address them as Christ would want us to.
Yeah. I'm so glad you brought that up, because it's true. Like, even the 501c3 status was originally brought in. Part of the purpose of that was to silence pastors, because pastors were so they were so strong from the pulpit in speaking to the issues of the day, the political issues of the day, that they wanted to silence them. So they figured out, hey, well, let's create this tax exempt status, but in exchange for that, we're going to tell you can't really talk about politics anymore.
Right. Right. And the church has to get back to it. I mean,
Yes.
yeah, I mean, crap. If I'm a pastor, or if I'm at a church, I'm literally telling them, you probably need to tell who you should vote for and who you shouldn't. This
Yes.
person demonstrates Christian values. This person does not, or
Yes.
both of these people do, but this person supports this and this person supports this.
Yes.
The pastors are failing their
Yeah.
congregations by not talking about political issues.
Yeah.
I go to Flatirons
Uh-huh.
in Lafayette, and Jim Bergen has been pretty good over the last year or two of touching on political issues, even if they're uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Talking about the trans issue and the gun issue, and many of these things that are uncomfortable to a
Yeah.
lot of people. And I've been very proud of attending a church especially of that scale,
Yeah.
that is willing to take hard facts and truth,
Yeah.
to the congregation.
Right. And at the heart of every political issue is a moral one. I mean, you can probably not ever find an issue that's being batted around, especially with so much emotion, that doesn't at its core have a moral issue that you're addressing. And pastors, they own the truth lane. They're there to be the conscience of government. And I think some churches are getting that. A lot of pastors are. I'm glad yours is, for sure. And you just mentioned something about facts, that, hey, speak to the facts. On your website, I know that you've got a great resource called Gun Facts, which talks about the real statistics around guns, around gun violence. And it's an important resource, I think, for people to know the truth, because this is such a political football.
Yeah, we don't update it as often as we should. It probably needs a quick refresh, but that's something that we take pride in making sure that our members are aware of what's going on in the world, debunking a lot of these
Yeah.
myths that gun control is going to save you,
Yeah.
and giving the actual hard line facts,
Yes.
of the issue.
Yes. Yeah, it's good. I think it's a great resource. And we know, of course, that the vast majority of deaths at the hands of a gun are suicide. 65% of all gun deaths each year are through suicide. And almost all the rest are because of gangs and drugs. You're talking about inner city gangs and drugs, roughly 30%. So you've got this very, very small percentage of gun-related crime that isn't part of gangs, drugs, or suicide. But the other thing that we never talk about is how many crimes are prevented by law-abiding gun owners each year. And those numbers are massive, aren't they?
Right. So I believe it's in More Guns, Less Crime, a book written by Dr. John Lott. I don't want to misquote the statistic, but it's somewhere within like 85% of defensive gun uses, the trigger's never pulled.
Wow.
Meaning that, if you have someone breaks into your home and they want to kill your, wife and kids, and you draw a gun on them, and they say, okay, don't shoot me, I'll leave. That's not necessarily recorded by the FBI, but it's in a police report. So they've done a fairly extensive study on that. And really those numbers should be included.
Yeah.
But, federal government agencies such as the FBI, they don't want to include that stuff. That doesn't
Yeah.
fit the narrative.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, maybe this is a good opportunity right now to kind of close out our time together and talk about, there's a lot of listeners who either are new gun owners or who are gun advocates and concealed carry, but there's others that are considering it. What are a couple of things that you would tell law-abiding citizens to do to best protect their rights and their families?
So don't just buy one gun, buy two. Buy a rifle and a pistol,
Mm,
and train with them extensively.
mm,
I know not everyone can afford to shoot thousands of rounds a month, but dry firing, practice in front of your refrigerator. Remember the four rules of firearm safety.
mm.
Don't point the gun at anything that you're not willing to destroy. Point it at a refrigerator. Dry fire it. Know how the gun feels when you pull the trigger.
Yeah.
Train extensively. Train with simunition. Don't let the first time that you need to pull the trigger on another human being be the first time that you do that.
Mm,
Train with simunition where you can fire a live round at someone else and it's not going to hurt them.
yeah.
And because even when you're doing that, I mean, the first time I did it, I'm like in shock because I've always been trained, don't pull the trigger unless you're willing to kill this person.
Yeah.
And it changes your mindset of
Yes.
how you're firing that weapon.
Mm,
And not only that, but know exactly the laws
mm,
surrounding your area, whether that be your state, your county, your local municipality.
mm.
Know those laws and figure out how you can get plugged in to change them.
That's
If you
good.
live in Colorado and you even remotely care about the Second Amendment, you need to be an RMGO member.
Mm,
You can sign up to be a member at rmgo.org. If you live in another state, the National Association for Gun Rights may have a group similar to RMGO.
mm.
If you don't, I would consider joining the National Association for Gun Rights. They are fighting in state legislatures across the country to fight back, and not only fight back, but advance the Second Amendment
Mm.
in several states.
That's amazing. That's great. Great advice. And, it's interesting. My wife, who, 20 years ago, when I first brought up this topic that I needed to have firearms in order to be able to protect our family should someone enter the home with more firepower than I currently had, which was nothing, by the way, other than my fists. I convinced her that it would be better to be able to meet force with force, of course. But now she's such a believer in defending our family, and she sees the unraveling of our culture, this violent culture that's happening. And she now has bought her a firearm, concealed carry weapon for her birthday. She's starting to get trained in that. And so, how important is it that women engage in this? We never talk about this, but I think there's a growing movement among women to be prepared at the highest level to defend themselves.
Yeah, I completely agree. The gun shop that we office above has a tremendous women's program that
Mm,
they have specific shoots for ladies.
that's great.
They have classes from everything to what holster are you going to pick.
Wow.
If you are wearing a dress, you
Mm,
don't have a belt to latch that holster onto. How are you going to carry your firearm if you are
mm,
going to be committed to carrying a firearm every day?
that's great.
If you're at the grocery store and you start hearing shots ring out, what are you going to do? Don't carry every day and let the first time that you hear gunfire shooting at you be the first time that you think about that.
Yeah.
I call it tactical daydreaming.
Mm,
So I'll often sit in the office or wherever I'm at, and just have spatial awareness of what's going on. Know where the doors are.
yes.
Know where, if you had to leave immediately, how could you get out quick?
Yes.
And ladies are really taking this into their own hands, which is
Mhm.
a great thing.
Yes.
One of our plaintiffs, Alicia
Mm,
Garcia, in our 3-day waiting period case, is a firearms instructor, and she does specifically that. We were actually just having a conversation yesterday about my wife's concealed carry gun that
mm,
she's been carrying, and she wants to change to something else,
yeah.
and how to go through that
That's
process. So
great.
finding women instructors
Mm,
is critical, but knowing exactly, the when you go to these classes, know what you're getting into too.
yeah.
I mean, is it going to be a live fire class? Is it going to be, picking a holster class? Is it going
Mm,
to be a tactical daydreaming class? All of those are important to take for women specifically,
yeah.
and I 100% stand behind more training is always better. Of course, I don't want the government to regulate that, but you should spend at least double on training than you did on your guns.
That's a great test for it. Hey, Taylor, thanks so much. Hey, first of all, thanks for what you're doing with Rocky Mountain gun owners. Thanks for what you're doing to spread, your legislative moves across the country to really fight for this at the highest level. Thanks for everything that you're doing to keep our communities safe and to make sure that we don't lose these inalienable rights because we just weren't paying attention. Taylor, appreciate you, my friend.
Yeah, thanks so much. It was good chatting.
You bet. God bless you.